Hello, my name is Evan Raven. This is my final presentation video for MBA 690 Global Strategy. I'll be using recommendations from Coursera on PowerPoints by using powerful charts and comments rather than only using text. So that will be my foundation moving forward with this presentation. What I want to open up with is strategy foundation. I think this is kind of the building block of what I saw moving forward on understanding strategy and how it kind of fits into what we will be learning, what we did learn throughout this semester. I really liked the reading "What is Strategy" by Michael Porter, and it dives into a pretty interesting dynamic of strategy versus operational effectiveness. And we're actually working in an operational effectiveness department, can see firsthand how strategy needs to be come out in the open, presented in order for operational effectiveness to actually move in on a project and kind of use that strategy as their foundation of different projects and goals moving forward. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic that Michael Porter opens up with operational effectiveness versus strategy, and it is one that I will be definitely using in my career moving forward. The next thing I would like to talk about is stakeholders, and the biggest thing I took away with stakeholders is the core ideology that stakeholders must share in order to be effective. In Building Your Company's Vision by James Collins and Jerry Porras, core ideology defines the enduring character of an organization. I think that and the only way for an organization to implement a strategy and actually execute them is if all the stakeholders within a dynamic organization are on board and on track with the same thing that they all want to achieve. If not, it's going to be very challenging moving forward for them. In regard to performance results, understanding one's strength, I think it's an important characteristic when in working in a professional working environment. Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker expresses that you really need to know your strengths. Most people know their weaknesses, but most people do not know their strengths. And I think that this is a strategy that you could play a game with yourself, knowing yourself and knowing how you learn, how you lead, and what is the best characteristics for you moving forward to have a professional working career. I think that this is something that I'm going to take away personally, kind of reflect on what are my strengths and how can I play those to my advantage and see what that has to offer me and how it could better benefit my professional career. In regard to communication, I think it's very important to understanding people and oneself. This goes back into managing oneself from Peter Drucker. Kind of where do you fit in? How do you contribute? What should you contribute? I think it's important to understand the people around you to kind of build a sense of a better team, being a better team member, knowing how they operate, what to do, not to do. And if you kind of understand your surroundings, it's very important also to understand yourself and how you better fit in those surroundings. And I think communicating and having a sense of purpose and a sense of a good structure in regard to networking and organizing who you need to know and who's important that you need to know also helps with you developing a professional career. And I'm taking this very personally as well, and how I'm going to apply this into my professional career moving forward. In regard to change, this plays a very important role in my life. Throughout the 1 year that I have been starting my professional career, I've gone through many changes. I work at a hospital system. I've had to deal with a new electronic medical record, changing roles and responsibilities, meeting a tremendous amount of new people, knowing how to fit in with those people, the do's and don'ts, and also just understanding what I want to pursue, what are my likes and what are my dislikes, I think that change is very important as well in regard to something that we spoke on this past semester of competing on analytics. There's a lot of change going, but there's also a lot of data coming out of that change, and I think this kind of is a very overarching logistical picture of how to manage that change, how to see it efficiently and effectively, and what to actually do with that change. Strategy Man was a very interesting comic book series on strategy that we read earlier this semester. I took it away of in my relationship and work experience to this comic book and how it pertains to my life. One of the biggest things is all the different obstacles that the team is facing against all of these dynamics, enemies, and how Strategy Man and his team is able to kind of help them move along the way with that. Um, the biggest thing throughout this book that I noticed that it plays a part in my professional career is communication and how some departments rely on other departments with no communication that the work is actually being done, but that it just is being done because it's their job. I think that I've noticed this personally in my career of how this lack of communication is a very important and critical thing that makes a project not go well if there's no communication. So I think Strategy Man emphasized that a lot and makes me know going forward to put an emphasis on it. What I didn't learn in business school was one of the best books I've read, and it's definitely going to be read again by myself moving forward in my professional career. It's entertaining. It's got a personal touch to it. It emphasizes stakeholders, just in learning, observing, and different dynamics. I think in regard to these four characteristics that I mentioned about the protagonist, he realizes of how many different stakeholders, how he is trying to observe these stakeholders and what he is learning and the different dynamics that all these different people he is working with um, shows that he is very new into his role. No matter how smart he is coming out of business school, there are some things that they do not teach you. And Justin finds this out some things sometimes in the hard way, and sometimes he's able to let off easy learning a hard lesson. Um, I think it's a very great book. I'm going to recommend this going forward. I learned the biggest thing I learned from it was Justin having being very convinced during interviews. I think it is very important to be skeptical and optimistic, knowing that people are going to put personal touches on things, especially in regard to plasticware throughout this novel. Moneyball was a very interesting movie that I have seen several times, and it was very interesting to have a more analytical and strategy approach to it. I think that this movie focuses on understanding the game from an analytical perspective. Billy Bean looks at the game differently and puts an emphasis on what I thought was very important was on base percentages. He thinks that if we can get players on base, regardless of any other stats they have, then we can possibly score more runs. And in regard to organizational constraints, he does not have a big budget as is. So finding these underrated players that have a very unique analytical statistics about them is a very interesting and new thing, strategy approach to baseball, because most of the time it's going after the certain few players and spending a lot of money on them. But looking at it from different analytics and different statistics shows that it's a very good possibility and a good strategy to have moving forward. So it's a different and a good approach that Billy tries out in baseball, and I think it's one to keep an eye on moving forward. Mr. Baseball was an older movie, and I think that the protagonist, Jack Elliott, has a big takeaway on him needing to know himself. I think that his ego gets the best of him sometime. I think that he's very full of himself. I think that he needs to humble himself, especially when working in a foreign land, playing baseball in a foreign land, knowing that there's going to be dynamics, already previous interfirm relationships, and how that Jack is not going to fit right into the organization and succeed. He thinks he is, but little does he know that there's a lot of different traits that he's going to have to learn. Example of not spitting his chewless tobacco out on the field, of how this is disrespecting their culture, and he finds that as a shock. So I think it's important for knowing your environment and knowing put yourself in the best situation to succeed and not to fail. And I think this is something that Jack can take away moving forward. In regard to a comparison and contrast of Mr. Baseball and Moneyball, I want to focus mainly on comparison and how interfirm relationships, dynamics, and core values all played an important role of developing the key stakeholders within both of these movies. These stakeholders would be Billy Beane from Moneyball and Jack Elliott from Mr. Baseball. Um, these two stakeholders had very different approaches to strategy. Billy Beane was a very overarching analytical approach, while Jack Elliott was more of a personal approach. And I think that this is very two interesting takeaways on strategy, and it's a very interesting and unique two stories that are told about similar concepts. In regard to contrast, same thing that I mentioned was one's very overarching while one's very personal. So they are similar, but they do have their differences. In regard to lessons learned in regard to strategy throughout the semester, I really had a big emphasis and focus on stakeholders, core values, dynamics, and interfirm relationships that kind of overarched my view on strategy. I think the one of the biggest things I took away was core values. Core values is a foundation that is laid that is the beginning of a strategy being implemented. And these core values need to be fluent, like an ecosystem of an organism within an organization, so everyone is on the same page. If everyone is not on the same page, it's going to be very challenging for a strategy to move forward and actually have some movement. Um, so I think that core values, along with putting these stakeholders in the right places, making sure that every relationship is on the same board of core values. And I took strategy more of a personal approach, like Jack Elliott, rather than a overarching approach of a Billy Beane in my take. So it was a very interesting take on both of them in regard to lessons learned. Thank you for watching this presentation, and these are the references that I have used throughout this presentation. I learned a lot about strategy this semester and plan to use a lot of it in my professional career. Thanks. The next thing I want to dive into is global strategy, dynamics, and understanding. I think it's important what Casara mentions in regard to business strategy and corporate strategy, that without value, there is no strategy. Without strategy, there is no effective sales activity. I think that without having value and a sense of purpose, there is no strategy. So there will be no global strategy. And this is one of Casara's basic foundations moving forward in regard to global strategy. And we see global strategy play a bigger role in Justin and what I didn't learn in business school, of how there's many different factors that want to take things globally, but there are also a lot of constraints that come along with that, but there are also a lot of benefits. But we will discuss that a little later in later slides. So we'll see how that portrays in Justin's category. But in regard to global strategy, the dynamics of understanding of the complex situations that one can get put into is very important, and Casara lays that out really great.